Welcome to Podcast for Fun. This is the show where we dive into the passion, the process, and the journeys of creative storytellers as they bring their stories to life. I'm your host, Sophia, and today we are joined by a talented comic book artist, Ronn Sutton. Thank you so much for being here, Ron.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So, let's start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your career.
Okay. I'm 72 years old right now, and I've been doing this. I've been doing this since I was a teenager in one shape or another. I started out when I was in high school, drawing for fanzines, which were amateur magazines about comics, and they were printed in Ditto and Mimeo and some other forms that no longer even exist. But by the time I was around 19. That's when I started getting really serious about drawing, and to the point where I actually moved in with my favorite artist, which was Bernie Wrightson, who was the co-creator of Swamp Thing. I moved to the United States and slept on his living room couch for a number of months. And about 8 miles away was the painter Jeff Jones, better known to a lot of people as Jeffrey Catherine Jones, the fine artist. And I was doing a lot of work under the table for other artists, anonymously drawing their strips, and they would sign their names to it. And then I moved back to Canada. Since then, I've worked for a number of small companies in particular, and independent companies, small publishers on science fiction comics and horror comics. And by the 1990s, I was drawing Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. I drew almost 50 issues of Elvira.
Mm.
And the last 9 years, I've been working for Edgar Burroughs Incorporated, doing weekly comic strips. And that started out adapting the novel The Man-Eater into 150 weekly strips, followed by Carson of Venus, which I'm still working on after having drawn 213 of them so far. And I'm also drawing the weekly comic strip just the last year of Korak the Killer, Korak being Tarzan's son. In fact, the Carson I finished just a couple of days ago. That was the 400th page. I had penciled, inked, lettered, hand lettered, old school Zipatone. So then aside from that, I had small careers in magazine illustration and animation and courtroom sketching and all kinds of stuff.
Oh
I've been a
my God.
busy boy.
What would you say was your biggest inspiration as an artist?
I can tell you about three moments in reading comic books that sort of changed my life. The first one was when I was, let me think, 13 years old. I went to my local variety store because that's the only place you could buy comic books back then. Variety stores and drug stores. There were no comic book stores at that point. And Flash Gordon #1 came out from King Comics, illustrated by Al Williamson. And I was a big Marvel superhero fan, reading all the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Fantastic Four and Captain America and all those books.
Mhm.
And I found this Flash Gordon, and I just sort of like it spun my head around. I sort of went, "Oh, there's something else going on here. This is another way of doing comics entirely, being a much more illustrative approach." And that had a huge impact on me. And of course, I started trying to hunt down other work by Al Williamson. Fortunately, he actually drew two more issues of Flash Gordon. So that was an important moment. In '69, which would make me about 17, Bernie Wrightson, Bernie Wrightson was starting to draw Web of Horror comics and drawing for Spoffon and Squatron and House of Mystery. And he also did two issues of a sword and sorcery comic for Showcase called Nightmaster. And
Mhm.
again, I saw that stuff and I just went, "Wow, this is the best comic art I've ever seen." Um, and it ultimately led to me tracking him down, going to the not New York, Detroit Triple Fanfare in 1970 for my very first convention ever. Um, Going there specifically to meet him and befriend him, which I did do, and then we were friends for the rest of our lives. And then the third thing that happened was after I met Bernie 2 years later in 1972, I moved into Bernie Wrightson's living room and slept on his living room couch for a number of months. And Bernie was drawing Swamp Thing at that point. And Um, and there was Michael Kaluta lived in New York City, and he was a close friend with Bernie, as was Jeff Jones, the painter Jeff Jones. And Michael started drawing Carson of Venus for DC when DC got the license to all the Edgar Burroughs comics, and they were just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful looking comics. Did I mention they were beautiful? And that sort of changed my life. I wanted immediately to draw Carson of Venus, and so I started filling up fanzines with my own drawings of Carson. And now, finally, after like 50 years, I finally get the assignment. So it was worth the wait.
What do you think, like, not convinced, but how did you befriend your artist? Because I feel like a lot of people try that, but definitely did not succeed at your level.
Well, it was funny because like I said, I specifically went to this convention just to meet him and become friends with him, and I went and introduced myself, and I was obviously super complimentary and very enthusiastic, and I guess I told him he was the greatest artist in the world, and they didn't pay him enough money, and I guess he thought he liked that. So we ended up, and we just hit it off. Our personalities were very similar because we both liked terrible 1960s and 1970s horror movies, and real schlocky horror films. And our personalities just hit it off. And so when the convention ended, I went back to Toronto, and he and I talked on the phone all the time, and we started corresponding. I actually have letters written by Bernie Wrightson. That's a real rarity, believe me. Um,
Mm.
and we just stayed in touch, and I think I saw him. I went into New York City and saw him at one point, and we just stayed in touch. And then eventually circumstances came about that I was in a financial position that I could call him up and say, hey, can I come and live with you? And he said, let me think about it, let me talk to my girlfriend. And a week later I called him, and he said, yeah, okay. So I moved into his place, and he was an extremely nice man, extremely generous, and he actually got work for me, sort of under the table work, working on other comic book projects. And yeah, like I said, we stayed friends all those years up until he passed away a number of years ago now. So
What would you say your definition of a beautiful comic is?
beautiful comic. I guess something drawn with a lot of heart to begin with. I'm very, very old school, so I really like people like um, Hal Foster from Prince Valiant. I really like Alex Raymond from Flash Gordon, a lot of
Mm.
that kind of stuff. So people that are really thoroughly involved in their work, just completely involved, immerse themselves in the subject matter, try to constantly outdo their own drawing, which is something I'm always aiming to do. I mean, everything I work on, I sort of feel like has to be much better than the previous one. It
Mm.
was interesting when I worked on Elvira, because I worked on Elvira for 9 years and drew almost 50 issues, and it was an anthology comic. So each issue had two stories in it, a long story and a short story. And for the most part, they were all self-contained. Um, and they weren't continued stories. And yeah, and they were really quite individual stories. So it didn't matter what order you read the stories in. And I was only one of several artists working on the comic. And so at a certain point after I'd been drawing for a few years, I talked to Richard Howell, my editor, and I said, what happens if I don't meet the deadline on this story? If I don't meet the deadline, you'll just run somebody else's story instead of mine, right? And he said, yeah, because it didn't matter because they weren't continued. I said, okay, we're going to change the rules now. I said, from now on, instead of you giving me the script and telling me when it's due, from now on, you're going to give me the script and I'm going to tell you when it's finished because I'm just going to slow down, way down, because I just want to start improving the quality of the artwork every time. I don't want to be banging these things out and then kind of, diminishing. I want
Mm.
them getting better and better every time. And of course, from an artistic standpoint, that's a really smart thing to do because I
Yeah.
did a lot of growing in those years. from a financial viewpoint, it was a disaster because I mean, I was getting paid by the page, not by the hour, and I was now putting in twice as many or more hours on each page. But it led to a real growth period and a lot of personal pride. So,
What kind of things do you learn?
uh, everything. I mean, design, storytelling, anatomy. I spend a lot of time, as I said earlier, I mean, I draw all the time. I draw
Hmm.
sort of literally from the time I get up until the time I go to bed, more or less every day. But I also spend, my idea of relaxing is to spend time looking at my favorite artists. And again, it's people like Hal Foster and Thomas Yates and Michael Kaluta and Alex Raymond and Al Williamson. And I spend a lot of time looking at their work, mostly analyzing it, trying to figure out how they drew things and why they drew things a certain way, and try to envision in my own mind the hand going across the page, actually drawing. So yeah, that's how it works for me anyway.
Do you have an example of like one instance when you notice something specific and like, oh, now I should incorporate this into my style?
Um, Not specifics, but I'm constantly looking at all those people. I'm also looking at Roy Krenkel's work a lot as well, who was an illustrator, who illustrated a lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs stories and novels. It's funny though, when I took over Carson of Venus, I started with episode number 189, and I just finished number 403 a couple days ago. Yeah, so like I said, they're on 213 so far. Uh,
Oh my God.
yeah, it's a lot. It impresses myself. I got a lot of stamina, not much energy, but a lot of stamina. Um, One of the things when I started on it, I was the fourth artist working on Carson of Venus, and when I inherited the strip, Carson was dressed in literally a black T-shirt and black Lycra bicycle shorts, and the logo was very blocky looking, and all the buildings were very just kind of square looking buildings. And as soon as I got onto it, I said, well, we got to start changing things, immediately. Let's get this guy a helmet. Let's get him a cape, let's get him a sword. Let's make the buildings into towers and turrets and, try and ramp up the fantasy level. And a lot of that too comes from looking at Roy Krenkel's work. So there's an example, and looking at Al Williamson's Flash Gordon work, and looking at Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon work. And another thing I noticed is it's Carson of Venus in many ways is a love story. It's a love story between Carson Napier and Princess Duare.
Mm.
And I started noticing when I was looking at a lot of Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon work from the 1930s and the 1940s. And nobody ever seemed to get this ever again. Maybe Al Williamson a little bit, nobody else in Flash Gordon's whole history. When Alex Raymond was drawing Flash Gordon and Dale Arden, they were always touching each other. I mean, they were madly in love. They always had their arms around each other, or one was touching the other one. They literally could not keep their hands off each other. And and that just showed how much in love they were. And that's when I sort of clicked into that. I went, I've got to incorporate that into the story of Carson and Duare, so that if they're having a conversation, they're not standing 2 feet apart. They're standing side by side, and one has their arm around the other, and the other one is, touching them on the shoulder or something. So that's a good example.
Would you say that you've, incorporated a bit of your own romantic life into the comic when you're writing it? Like, oh, this is how I'd see the love of my life. I'm kidding.
Well, I hope I'm a romantic in a lot of respects. And yeah, yeah. I don't know how to elaborate on that, but yes.
Did you ever like reject a script because you didn't like it?
Um, uh, I handed back one script that was from Elvira. I told him I didn't want to draw it. And every issue of Elvira, I mean, it was about her. There were stories about her. They were always humorous stories. I mean, they had, touches of the macabre because that's part of her style. And I mean, it was for all ages. So there was no sex, there was no violence to speak of. I mean, there was always a lot of bare thigh and cleavage, but that's as far as it went, you know. and but all the stories were pretty much parodies of other things. And sometimes I would suggest things that would make a good story, particularly after my partner Janet L. Hetherington started writing for the Elvira comics. She wrote it for 6 years. Um, and so she, you know, if I felt like drawing dinosaurs, she'd write a story where Elvira meets dinosaurs, you know, that kind of thing. And the only script I ever got from them, well, actually, I got a lot of scripts I really liked that were parodies of things like Sleepy Hollow, and you know, and there was a H.P. Lovecraft parody that I really enjoyed working on. But the only script I ever got, it was a parody of if you remember the TV show for very, very little children called Teletubbies.
Yes,
Yeah. Yes.
I
I mean, it was probably great for real little kids, but it was just torture for adults to watch even a few minutes of it. And the script was about Teletubbies, and I sent it back to Richard and said, I can't draw this, you know, give me something else. And he says, well, I don't have anything at the moment. I'll have to get somebody to write something. It'll take a couple of weeks. And I said, that's fine. I don't even care, you know. I just don't want to draw this one.
What did you have against Teletubbies? That was my
Uh,
childhood.
you like Teletubbies?
No, I remember having trauma about of them because not trauma, nightmare because they looked so creepy to me. It's like
Yes.
why do they have an antenna on their head and why are they so colorful and they kind of look like monkeys? I'm so confused right now. That was my opinion of Teletubbies. But why
Yeah.
didn't you like Teletubbies?
I just, you know, the story, if I recall it, and I only recall parts of it because I think I only read it once, was that it turned out they were aliens and they were actually literally trying to take over the world. So there was somebody, some sort of uh, space character that was helping Elvira wipe them out. And my friend Leonard Kirk, who drew Supergirl for many years and stuff, he went, "Oh, that would be fun to draw, to to eliminate all these Teletubbies and blast them out of the world." And I said, yeah, except that means I have to draw Teletubbies for 15 pages, and I just don't want to do it. So that's one of the few times. But I don't think I've ever objected because I found stuff offensive or uh,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So
What kind of stories do you feel you're more attracted towards?
definitely high adventure for sure. I mean, that's especially like the Carson of Venus stuff and the Korak stuff. I'm really trying to play up, the feelings of old pulp magazines from the 1930s and old serials from the 1930s and 1940s, and all this stuff was going on before I was born. But I sort of was exposed to a lot of it secondhand, when I was in my teens, and continue to be exposed to it. So I just really like that stuff. The brave hero, stands a little taller than everybody else and will go that extra mile. And the girl that he's involved with, the true love, whose hearts are pure.
Mm.
That's very sweet and romantic. And and the villains are, they're not sort of gray. They're black. They're bad, bad, bad guys. They're black hearts. There's no kind of anti-hero sort of thing. They're evil. So we got really strong good characters versus really strong evil characters. And I get to draw all this stuff that I like. I got spaceships and ray guns and swords and handsome men with capes on, and girls in tight outfits, flowing outfits, and beautiful women and castles and turrets and just lots of fun stuff to draw. And I'm just trying to get the maximum out of it. It's funny, I think a lot about adventure heroes, and my mind keeps coming back all the time to Errol Flynn.
Mhm.
And I think about Errol Flynn and the Adventures of Robin Hood, and Errol Flynn and the Seahawk and Captain Blood, and how he was always bigger than life. And I think, if I'm drawing a scene where the hero, in this case, Carson of Venus, Carson Napier, is talking to some men and trying to inspire them, he's not just going to be standing there side by side talking. Because I think, what would Errol Flynn do? Well, Errol Flynn would be standing on a table, with his hands on his fist, talking to people, or he'd have one foot on a chair, or he was just bigger than life. And that's what I'm trying to incorporate when I'm drawing these things.
What do you mean by like bigger than life? Exactly.
Just he's this much taller than everybody else. He's this much stronger than everybody else. He'll never back down. He'll never let you down. He just goes the extra mile constantly. These guys are better than anybody we've ever met, and they're inspiring, and something to aspire to as well. So yeah, that's what I like about them.
How did you keep yourself so motivated to do all this?
Well, um, that's a good question. Um, the the first answer is I don't know. Um, Beyond that, I mean, it's just something I've always wanted to do, and as years have gone on, I'm getting more and more opportunities, so I don't want to turn down the opportunities, especially when they're precisely the things I want. Um, And as I said before, I mean, this whole thing about, there used to be a phrase going around that, that comics weren't a sprint, they're a marathon. And I really believe that. And doing these strips is like doing an actual printed newspaper strip, in that it's relentless. I mean, it just keeps coming and keeps coming and keeps coming and keeps coming. And I don't want somebody else to fill in and do it for me. And I don't want to give up the opportunity, because if I do, I'll never get it back again. So I don't know. It's funny. My whole life, I've known artists, and when I started out in my 20s, which was, let's face it, consider a considerable while ago. Um, um,
You're still
Everybody,
young.
what's that?
You're still young.
Yeah. Thank you for lying to me. Um, um, when I was in my 20s, everybody I met introduced themselves as being artists. They were either artists, or they were musicians, or they were writers, and as the years progressed, one by one they would drop away, because they would lose interest, or they would get full-time jobs, or they would get married and have other commitments, and so that creative aspects would just kind of fall to the wayside. And um, and so I guess that partially kept me motivated too. Plus, I mean, I have all my art heroes, and I trying to aspire to their level.
Hmm. Because this is not a diss to any artist watching this, but from my experience, a lot of you guys are flaky. I don't know how to, I can't say who, but there's a lot of you guys that are kind of flaky. So I find it interesting when I meet someone who's so dedicated in that aspect because it's very, very rare.
Yes, yes. Well, I'm pretty passionate about it and pretty dedicated, as you say, for sure.
Have you ever dealt with, you don't have to say who because, but like, have you ever dealt with any people that were quite hard to work with in the industry?
Yeah, I could give you a foot-long list, frankly.
What
People that,
are the stereotypes in like that you deal with, let's say?
well, I try not to deal with them anymore. I try to recognize the signs of people that are not going to follow through on their commitments. And that I think is the main thing, is people that it's very easy for them to set up a project and get it going and have you do all the work. And so there's been a few times that I've done whole projects, and suddenly the person that was behind it just sort of drifts away. They don't even tell you the project isn't even happening anymore. They don't make sure you're getting paid for it. They just kind of slip into the darkness. So it's I'm very cautious about who I work for these days. And I mean, going back like 30 years ago, there was a number of publishers I was dealing, which were pretty sleazy individuals, quite frankly. And I knew I was taking my chances dealing with some of them, and periodically I got burned. But it seems common amongst everybody who's a long time professional that I know. at some point they've got, worked on projects that they didn't get paid or published, or it got published and they didn't get paid, which is even worse. But you just have to recognize it, and make sure you're dealing with upstanding people who, I mean, you can tell when somebody is truly dedicated to what they're doing.
What's the signs?
What's the signs? Um, I don't know. Honesty is probably the first one.
There's liars. I'm kidding. Of course there is, but like what
Yeah,
do they lie about?
honesty and enthusiasm, and I mean, you know yourself what people are like. So,
Yeah. What do you mean by like enthusiasm? Because what if someone, who are very enthusiastic in their idea talks about it to you, but you find out that they haven't like made anything. Would you still work with them even if they're enthusiastic and seem
probably not. Probably not. I mean, part of that enthusiasm is them doing their part, you know. So you can see pretty quickly if somebody is, say, publishing, and they're getting you involved in their project, and they're not doing anything at their end. They're not promoting it, or not fundraising, or not doing whatever they need to do to keep the project moving ahead. Then pretty soon, you've made a mistake. So
yeah.
there's been the last time it happened to me, I actually pulled out of the project because I was completely positive that I was going to get screwed around, which I sort of did, but I still managed to get paid, although the person kind of yeah, the person kind of did some sneaky stuff to try not to pay me. But anyway, so I try,
Oh.
I try and deal with responsible people as much as possible.
How did your family react to your passion throughout your life?
Well, my mother was supportive. My father was a police officer. My father was a police officer in Toronto. He was on the mounted unit, which meant he rode a horse every day. Um, and he and I, from about the time I was like around 13 or 15, something like that, when I really started getting enthusiastic about being an artist. From that point on, we kind of never really got along ever again, truly. So, and he passed away more than a decade ago now, and we never truly resolved things. Things sort of got better at different points, but um, he was as I like to say, a concrete thinker. He wasn't an imaginative person. He thought you should go out and get a job and stay at that job, and if possible, make sure it's a union job. And my goal was always to just keep moving around and drawing, and working on going from project to project and opportunity to opportunity. And I came from a real blue collar family because literally everybody in my family were either police officers or school janitors, or that kind of thing, security guards. So it was very straight and narrow focus. There was no creative people in my family. So when I started out, I really had a lot of problems trying to figure out where to go. And it wasn't like there's an internet back in the 1950s and 1960s where you can look up things. I mean, if you're sitting in the middle of the suburbs and you're 13 years old and you want to draw, you don't even know where there's an art store, so let alone
Mhm.
anything else, let alone publishers or how to contact them, or, so I had to figure it all out on my own.
So how did you do that? Did you make a plan? Like, I'm gonna do this, go to art school, blah blah blah.
Well, my plan was to do everything wrong, and I succeeded at that. Uh, I didn't go to art school. At one point, when I was in my 20s, I lived a block away from the Ontario College of Arts, and every year I'd see all the students going to school. And I kept
Mhm.
thinking, why should I pay to go to art school when I can actually make some money, not a lot of money, but make some money actually creating art? Why would I pay to go to school? Um, so yeah, I just sort of figured out everything on my own, and like I said, I made lots and lots of mistakes. I did a lot of things backwards, but I just kept looking for opportunities.
Mhm.
So,
What was the biggest, most common mistake you think you made?
do you think I'm going to tell you?
You learn.
um, I guess probably focus. I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say that considering how dedicated I've been, but I kind of was all over the place. I was kind of trying to draw at one point superhero comics, another, and on the opposite end of the scale, trying to draw underground comics at one point. And I was trying to do cartooning, and I was trying to draw serious magazine kind of illustrations, and so I was kind of like trying everything. And it would have been smarter. Yeah, it would have been smarter just to focus on one thing entirely, which ultimately I've finally done, but it took me a long time to figure that out. So,
Mhm. So what's that specific thing you're focusing on now?
well, like I say, the high adventure stuff, and doing
Mhm.
really sort of classic looking work. And, with the comic strips, like I said, I'm penciling and making them, I'm hand lettering them. I'm using old school Zipatone, which means I have to order this stuff from the only place in the world that still makes it, which is in Japan. I have to order it directly from Japan. And do you know what Zipatone is? It's
I
the
don't actually. What
Oh,
is
okay.
it?
Sorry. It's sheets that are a sheet of a backer sheet and then a sheet of plastic with dots printed on it. And,
Yes, I
yeah,
know it's for mangas.
yes, for manga. Well, it is for manga now, but I mean, it used to be used in all comics. And the only place that makes it, as I say, is a place in Japan for manga
Mhm.
creators. And they have, I don't know, they have like a couple hundred different sheets, of which only three are applicable to the kind of work I do. So I ordered them, and like I say, you've got the plastic sheet and it's sort of sticky on one side. You attach it to the artwork, and you cut using an X-Acto knife. You cut it out, and you pull away the excess and keep what you want. And it's a very old school method that they used, in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, even in the 70s. Finally, in the 80s, they sort of stopped manufacturing it. And by the 90s, it was just gone here in North America. Um, but I mean, that's something that, I mean, people keep looking at my work and saying, well, you can do that on a computer. And I keep going,
Yeah.
I can't do it on a computer. I don't want to do it on a computer. I want everything on the artboards. I want it to be like old school artwork, where everything is on the artboards, all the drawing, all the lettering, all the zipatone, all the toning, whatever. It's all on the artboard. And part of that too is self-preservation because there's been some projects I've worked on that I don't letter, and I'm just handing in the penciled and inked artwork. And twice on two separate projects, there's been a page or more pages have gone to print that didn't have the lettering printed on it.
Mhm.
Oh, that was sort of stupid.
Why do you think you didn't want to go to digital? I know you said self-preservation, but couldn't you preserve yourself through the digital media? You know?
You know, I I'd have to learn a whole new set of skills in order to start doing that. And rather than dedicate my time to that, I'd rather dedicate my time to continuing to explore and discover the kind of drawing I'm already doing it. I'm trying to, at the moment, trying to teach myself how to paint, and I've had a few of the paintings published so far. Um,
Mhm.
and I look at some of the people that are painting digitally, and I'm super, super impressed with their skills. I kind of wish I could do that, but on the other hand, again, it means learning those skills of not only understanding color, not only understand painting, but how to actually operate the computer to do it. Yeah, my eyes bug
Mm.
too. So I just figure let's just again continue with the traditional methods. So I'm mostly doing watercolors and acrylic paintings at the moment.
You know, that's how I feel when I'm trying to hire an artist and they're like, "Oh yeah, I use like 50 different I don't know, mediums." Like there's like a bunch of apps for coloring and drawing, right? And I
Right.
use one. And my artist is like, "Oh, I used four for this." I'm like, "I don't know how to use the other three. Why did you use four? Now I can't fix it. This
Hmm.
is I can't
Right.
edit it. I can't access the file.
Right.
My life just becomes extra hard. So now I just hire people who only use that one software, so it just makes it so much easier for
I'm
me.
sure. I'm sure.
Right? So why do you think that didn't like digital media come like a long time ago, if I'm correct? I'm not sure when it started. When did the digital thing start?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah, you were
That's,
in from the very traditional to the very digital media.
yeah,
You
but
saw
I've
transition.
always avoided the digital stuff. So I mean, I spent some time in the 1980s art directing magazines. I became a magazine illustrator in the late 70s and into the 80s, and I was drawing and doing illustrations for Maclean's and Toronto Life and Canadian Business and the Business Journal and the Toronto Star and all kinds of different publications like that. And eventually I started getting offered design and art directing full-time jobs with magazines, which I did for a few years, which were the worst years of my life, quite frankly. Uh, they were really, really, really good jobs for somebody else, but not for me. Because I just wanted to get back to just drawing full time. But as I was doing that, as I was doing all that art directing stuff, that's when a lot of the digital media was coming into the studios, and I was literally holding them at bay. I wouldn't let them through the door. And as soon as I left, they rolled the computers in. But yeah, I'm like I say, I'm just old school. I just want to keep doing it this particular way.
Okay, then I have one final question for you, Ron.
Sure, sure.
What's one advice you give to the aspiring artists watching this right now?
To to dedicate themselves a lot. I think they've got to start by um, studying a lot of anatomy. This is a very good tip. When I moved in with Bernie Wrightson, the first thing he did was hand me a constructive anatomy book by George Bridgman, who is our anatomy artist that even Frank Frazetta learned from. So that's a good place to start. I think you've got to be dedicated, spend a lot of time. I mean, I can remember when I was in my 20s, I was pretty lazy. Yeah, well, I was, and I was lazy for a few reasons. I was lazy because I was lazy, because I didn't have a lot of skills back then. So I sort of got bored drawing pretty quickly because it would never turn out the way I wanted it to. Um, so I don't know. You just have to, stick with it. That's the main thing, I guess, really, truly.
Push through, guys,
That's
and
it.
do what you love. And
Yes.
if you don't like it, get better. That's
There's a quote which I can't remember offhand,
uh
but Alex Raymond talks about how there's no secrets, there's no easy way. You just have to, and I'm paraphrasing him. You just have to keep pushing through. And he talked about how only 1 out of 100 people that say they want to do this stuff, will have the enthusiasm to actually get there. And it's really true. I mean, if you want this stuff, you're really going to have to do it. As I said before, when I was in my 20s, there were just so many people that were kind of pretend artists. So, I mean, if you want this stuff, draw and draw and draw and draw some more.
I think that's a good advice. Like I said, most people are flaky. Just don't be the flaky one. It's not that. If you think about it, all you have to do is just do it, which is
Yeah.
not that difficult. You just, in my opinion at least.
Well,
Like
you keep getting better. It is difficult, but you keep getting better. So that's
I,
the big secret.
I tell myself like, if you want to be in the top 10%, you just have to like continuously do it. And then you have to start, and if you want to be a top 5%, you have to continue to do it. And if you want to be in the top 1%, you have to continuously improve and do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that is like a million people, though. That's why there's like a lot. But
Well,
it's
that's the best advice of all. There you
exactly. And
go.
Ron, where can our awesome listeners find your work?
Okay, well, I've got a website which is www.ronnsutton.com. There's only maybe 200 or 300 pieces on it right now. It used to be a huge website, but it's smaller now.
Mhm.
I'm drawing the stuff for Edgar Rice Burroughs, and it's at the Edgar Rice Burroughs comic website, Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated comic website. I drew 150 episodes of The Man Eater, as I say, 213 so far weekly of Carson of Venus, and the Korak stuff hasn't started running yet. 11 years ago, I drew a graphic novel called Lucifer's Sword MC, Life and Death in an Outlaw Motorcycle Club, that was written by a 50-year member of the Hells Angels. And it's like an 86-page graphic novel that you can find somewhere. I'm not sure where at this point. And as far as the rest of the comics, I mean, there's back issues. There's hundreds of back issues I've drawn, but there's not super a lot online, aside from that.
Ooh, that is a lot. That sounds impressive.
Well, yeah, like I say, I've been doing it a long time, so
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of Podcast for Fun. Thank you so much, Ron, for joining us and sharing your incredible insight. I hope you enjoyed chatting with me. I enjoyed
absolutely.
listening to you.
Yeah, that was terrific. Thank you for the opportunity.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with fellow storytelling enthusiasts. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to explore, you can drop them in the comments or connect with me on any of my social medias at Podcast for Fun. Until next time, keep creating, keep dreaming, and we'll see you on the next episode of Podcast for Fun.